Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore an unusual sense ability we call ambience. With me is Lyn Buchanan. He is the author of Your Seventh Sense, or The Seventh Sense, and he refers to ambience as the sixth sense. Lyn was also a member of the Stargate remote viewing team at Fort Meade, Maryland. He was part of that project, I believe, for about 7 or 8 years. In addition, he now teaches remote viewing through his own company called Problems, Solutions, Innovations. Welcome, Lyn.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for inviting me to your home, too.
It's a pleasure to be with you once again. It's been, I think, a couple of years.
I believe it has, yeah. Yeah.
So the interesting thing when you refer to the ambience, the sense of ambience as your sixth sense, most people think the sixth sense is a psychic sense.
Right.
And what you're saying, no, the seventh sense is the psychic sense. The sixth sense is a normal sense, but not well understood.
Not well understood. In controlled remote viewing, we count it as a separate sense because, like, when your mind gets to a target site, you get the ambience. Like when you walk into a cathedral, it's a repeatable sense. Happens with everyone. There's that, you get to the edge of a cliff. Oh, yeah. There's a sense there. It's an ambience. You're not touching it, but you feel it. And when you touch something, it's your nerve endings.
Yep.
When you taste something, it's your nerve endings. Your eyes have your nerve endings, and so on. And the nerves are strands that carry electrical energy. Well, that's an antenna.
Yeah.
And when you get to a place and there is an overall feeling, you pick up on it. And so people say that there's not a body part to stick it to. Well, there is. It's your entire system acting as an
nervous system.
Yeah, acting as an antenna.
Yeah.
And we have found in controlled remote viewing that a viewer will say, "Oh, there's red at the side, and this shape, and this feel, and all that." And then we say, "Well, what's the ambiance?" Oh, and the minute they feel that ambiance, all of a sudden, all these other details start coming in about the target site. And so in CRV, we use it as a separate sense. We're not the only ones. Card players use it. I sit here, you're across the table. I know what's in your hand and if you're faking or not. People who read their audiences. Car salesmen use it. They get the ambiance of the person they're talking to. Now, it's a separate sense.
It could mean a lot of things. Like ambience might mean this is dangerous.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I should think in the military in particular, especially in battle.
Oh, yeah.
You need to have that sense of where you are every step you take.
Yeah. The ninjas have a name for it. It's called Sake no Jitsu. And that is an awareness of everything around you in 360 degrees. And they're good at it. They train it. Well, we train it too. And the nature of controlled remote viewing is different from the remote viewing you find on the internet. The nature of controlled remote viewing is that your subconscious mind picks up information from who knows where. But it has to get that to your conscious mind. So we train it to give that information to the body. The body reacts. Your conscious mind watches how your body reacts and knows. And the thing is, you'll see a lot of people say ideograms are just squiggles. And what we do is we train you that and it's like karate training. We say water, people make waves. We say man-made, and they'll make something with a kernel, angle. Mm-hmm. And we say land, and they'll usually draw a line like that.
Right.
And we do that until it becomes a knee-jerk reaction.
Are these examples of ambience then?
No, they're not.
Yeah.
This is the method that we use to get it from the subconscious mind to the body. Mm-hmm. And so then we say, after we've trained them in that, we say, okay, I have an envelope here, and there's a target picture in it. Mm-hmm. Describe the site that the picture is of. And by that time, the automatic nature kicks in.
Right.
It's idio.
These are the ideograms.
Well, yeah, but it's idiomotor.
Idiomotor. The idiomotor response.
And they'll have a pen in their hand, and it's on the paper. We'll say, okay, describe the site that's
and they'll start
pictured.
Drawing the ideograms without even being conscious.
Without even being conscious of it. And then they look and they say, well, it's got a wavy part. There's water there. Yeah. It's got something man-made.
But aren't we jumping ahead a little bit?
No, this is the beginning of it.
This is the beginning of the remote viewing training.
Of the remote viewing training.
But what about ambience?
Okay, the ambience comes later after they have learned to communicate. Mm-hmm. And they go through the first stage of training, the second stage of training, the third stage of training. And in the third stage of training, that's when we say ambience. And all of a sudden, everything opens up for them.
This is interesting, and I want to review it carefully. Because we've just said a lot, and some viewers are going to get lost.
Yeah.
And that is the ambience, which is a normal sense in your view.
Yeah.
But when you train people in remote viewing, you start by training them to create ideograms, which
are physical senses,
which are little drawings that are sort of ways of abbreviating very quickly certain things that they might perceive through their psychic sense.
At the end of the first stage, they say, I have no idea what the target is, but I know there's water and something man-made because my body just told me that.
Using the ideograms. Through the idiomotor response.
And you take the picture out of the envelope, and there's a ship sitting on the ocean.
Okay. So what you're saying is, in the remote viewing training, even though the sense of ambience is a normal sense, it's a rather advanced part of the remote viewing training.
Yeah. And this is one of the reasons why most people think it's the psychic sense. When it's actually not. Yeah. The controlled remote viewing isn't psychic. It's a methodology that as soon as something hits your subconscious mind, some knowledge, it's passed to the body passes it to the conscious mind, and you know what it is.
So you're assuming that the subconscious mind already has all the information.
Well, it has it available. Yeah.
That the key isn't obtaining the information. The key is transferring the information from the subconscious mind to the conscious mind.
That's what CRV is. Yeah. That's what controlled remote viewing is. Most people think that remote viewing is being psychic. Well, it takes advantage of the psychic sense, which is one step beyond ambience, because there's no body part to stick it to. There's nothing.
Yeah.
Ambience can tell me how you feel right now. I can pick up on your emotions. To pick up on the emotions of somebody in another country that I don't even have the name of, that's psychic. And how that works, we have no idea. We really don't.
In psychology, in perceptual psychology, there's a term called the Gestalt.
Yes.
Which it sounds like that's a lot like your use of the word ambience. Gestalt is sort of a synthesis of the overall impression. You might, for example, see a page with a lot of dots on it, but the Gestalt is connecting the dots and seeing the picture.
And that's what we start out with. And it is taking advantage of the ambience. We just don't cue it.
Yeah.
And
you don't cue it.
We don't say, get the ambience. We just say, here's a target number 73. and their hand does the trained motion.
Mm-hmm.
Then in stage 2, we go in and we say, okay, tap on the water. Now, on the ideogram for water.
Mm-hmm.
And they tap on it. They're affecting their nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And we say, okay, tell me how it tastes. Oh, it's salty. Okay, tell me the temperature. And we get, oh, it's cold,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. And that facilitates the communication to the conscious mind.
Mm-hmm.
Then after that communication line is fully established, then we say, ambience. Oh, and all of a sudden they get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really neat process developed by Ingo Swann,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes advantage of the ideomotor nature of the human body.
You start out with, but when you say, tell me the ambience, you don't know in advance what you're looking for.
No.
I mean, ambience could be it's very safe, it's very dangerous, but it might be something completely other than that. It might be
we may say, tell
very
me what
romantic.
Romantic, educational, scientific, religious, sporting, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then that sets them up for going into the more advanced stages where they start getting tiny, tiny details about every single part of the site.
Mm-hmm.
And Ingo Swann developed this, and I don't know how. This is such an advanced technique that is so different, totally different from psychic functioning.
Mm-hmm.
It takes advantage of the fact that your subconscious is psychic already.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't know how to tell you things.
Mm-hmm.
Psychiatrists make a good living because it doesn't know how to tell you things. And so the process that Ingo Swann developed actually forms a communication line, a clear communication line between your conscious and subconscious minds using the ideomotor things of your nerve endings.
And you have worked with this in the military for some 7-8 years and have been teaching it for decades.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still amazed by it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm almost never surprised by anything anymore. What I see the students do and all that. But if I ever quit being amazed by it, I will have just died. It's a really amazing thing that you can sit in this room and read documents that are locked in safes halfway around the world, do medical applications for people that you don't even know the name of, but somebody does, and they say, find out what's wrong and see if you can help them.
You were,
it's
as we discussed in an earlier interview, when you were working with the Stargate program at Fort Meade.
That's right.
You were in charge of keeping the database.
I'm a database freak. Yeah, I live, breathe, and eat data, and the data. Many times, a remote viewer would come back with 30 pages of information about a target. We would compile it, and then, a database is not just a bit bucket to keep data in. It massages it and brings out information. And so after we put the data into the database, we would have the database massage it and come out with information that not even the viewer got. It's an amazing process that was developed for the military, and most people still don't understand it. They look on the internet and see remote viewing and, that's spinning your head around in a circle and glazing your eyes over.
Sure. Most people, I don't know these days because I know our culture is changing rapidly.
That's right. It is. Very nicely, too.
There's, let's say, a percentage of people. I don't think it's most. I think it's a minority. I'd say really hardcore debunker skeptical types, 25% of the population.
Yeah,
but they say it's impossible. And I've seen comments on prior videos. People say, Lyn Buchanan must be lying. There could be no other explanation.
Yeah. And, of course, we've done it under the strictest laboratory conditions with government oversight, government people sitting there filming from all these different cameras, looking for cheating, and people still say, they cheated.
I had a viewer post a comment recently, said, well, the reason that the military dropped the remote viewing program is because it doesn't work.
And the CIA came out when they wanted to declassify it.
Yeah.
They came out and said that it was disbanded because it didn't work.
Yeah.
However, we were right at about 20 years in the service. We were funded each and every year, 1 year at a time, if we could pass all of the, jump through the hoops and show that we could do stuff. We had one senator one time come and said, I don't know if I'm going to vote for this, funding this next year or not. And he had a satchel, and it had a sealed envelope in it with a picture in it that he didn't know what it was. Some assistant
prepared it
because he didn't want us bleeding him for information. And so he watched a session, watched us do a session, and afterwards he said, I am totally unimpressed. He said, I expected to see something psychic. All I saw was two guys sitting at a table just talking and joking and every now and then one of them would write something down.
Yeah.
And our director said, okay, here's what he wrote down. Read this and look at your picture. And, excuse the language, the senator sat there looking at these two. Damn. We got funded for another year. But
eventually the funding was cut off, and as far as we know, hasn't been reestablished.
As far as we know is the key phrase there.
Yeah.
As far as we know. Yeah.
So
I've always said, we did wonders. We influenced military and government decisions. The information that we provided, first of all, for the police, and
even Jimmy Carter wrote positively about it in his autobiography.
And we showed that it worked over and over and over. However, if you're going to disband an organization, you have to say something like that. They just said, oh, well, it didn't work.
Yeah.
But the CIA came out and said that.
Well, now they've released, I believe, over 1 million pages of documents.
Yeah, and it shows that it worked.
Yeah.
And that was the problem that the CIA had, that they're 1 page against our 1 million pages.
Well, I realize there's a lot of politics behind all of this. But there's another controversy I'm aware of.
Okay.
Which is regarding the CRV training program itself.
Yes.
First of all, it's traditionally credited to Ingo Swann, but I have heard Hal Puthoff say, no, I'm the one who developed it. And then I have heard Ed May, who is another researcher who's part of the program, saying, well, Ingo developed it, but we have no data that it works. All of our data shows that the training program didn't work at all.
Yeah. Ingo developed it, and it works, and we have the documentation. So, I have no idea what the politics involved is, but Ingo developed it. It works. It worked for us for a quarter century.
Yeah.
And I think the information saved a lot of lives, Yeah. Now, you've got to understand that the intelligence agencies never send out the troops on one source. And so what happened with our information was it was put into the pool.
Yeah.
They would get spy in the sky satellites. They would get ground agents and all that. Once it was confirmed, then they would send out the troops, or if they were going to send out the troops, they would ask us for, they would tell us, this is Project 970403, question 7, what's the answer? Mm-hmm. And on nothing more than that, we would provide the information, they'd get it back, and they'd say, oh, okay, they agree, we'll send out the troops.
So you didn't always get feedback.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And another thing that I find quite interesting, well, two things. First of all, as you're explaining it to me now, and I think I'm really getting it for the first time.
Good.
even though I had my first remote viewing experience in 1976. But what you're explaining to me, and I think this is crucial, the training, the CRV training, has nothing to do with being psychic.
No, it doesn't. It has to do with establishing that communication between your non-psychic conscious mind and your psychic subconscious. Once you establish that communication, time and space, it's yours.
And essentially, the way you're explaining it to me now, it would seem that any person who has a conscious mind and a subconscious mind would be amenable, should benefit from that training.
That's right.
You don't have to be pre-screened.
We pre-screened for the government. We found that just about anybody can do this. If you're a tremendously good natural psychic, you don't need this. All this is for is just organizing your work, but getting the information. Hey,
well, a lot of very good psychics I know personally are not well-organized people.
That's the problem, And I've been teaching one class a year for good natural psychics. They, all of a sudden, they get the organization, and they say, hey, I never knew I could do this stuff, There is a fear factor, which includes people who are afraid of the unknown, people who are afraid of crossing their religion, and so on. And there's a third type of person who cannot get controlled remote viewing, and that is the rabid person who lives, eats, everything's psychic. There's a spider crawling up a wall. Oh, that's heaven telling us something, That person does not have the discernment to do a scientific process.
Well, some people like that may be on borderline psychotic. The process of remote viewing itself can also be disturbed by being very successful, I would think, because people get carried away.
That's right. One of the hardest problems with training remote viewing, controlled remote viewing, is that a person has to start dealing with himself. We have an analogy that the conscious mind is the president of the company, and one day you walk in with this kid and say, I want this kid to be in charge of the company for a week. Train him, And the conscious mind says, no way, I'm in charge of the company, And then you introduce the kid, and it's your own son. Now then, you want to help. But if the kid gets too good and does something that you should have been doing all along, you say, I'll take care of that next week, And so a person who has their subconscious and conscious meet, generally around the first time, the first few times, goes through this battle of who's going to be in control here. And this is one of the reasons that we have split the courses up into a basic course where you not only learn the process, but you also learn to deal with yourself. And once you've done that, then you go into the higher stages. The intermediate, you learn to get all kinds of details about what you found. The advanced is really neat stuff, but it's stuff that that you don't learn in the basic and intermediate. But one of my advanced students recently was in a psychic spy contest, and he was given the roof of a building, just a picture of the roof of a building, and they wanted to see how good a psychic spy was. They had 22 people enter the contest. Only 2 of them got anywhere near, him and one other person. And the other person sort of told what the building was about. My student laid out the interior floor plan of the building, room by room, told who was in each room, what equipment was in each room, laid out the floor plans, told, described all the details about everything that was in each room, and just laid out a floor plan of the building. He won the contest.
Well, you're talking about what some people have sometimes referred to as military-grade remote viewing.
Right. Yeah.
Which is, I suppose, a lot different than when I first did remote viewing. I didn't go through any of that. I had a very good hit right off the bat.
Yeah.
But they just said, relax, close your eyes, and describe where the outbound experimenter is.
Yeah. The controlled remote viewing used by the military, you never close your eyes, because when you close your eyes, you get a hit of alpha waves, and that drives your imagination. So you keep your eyes open all the time. You never go into a trance. You have a set procedure. You follow that procedure. Ingo one time said, on your worst day, when everything has gone wrong and somebody wants you to remote view, follow the structure, and the structure will carry you through. And it's true. We've had those days.
Well, though from your description, it would seem as if the remote viewers who are trained in this fashion should all be billionaires by, looking into the future and just saying, what's the stock market going to do tomorrow?
Yeah.
And to my knowledge, no remote viewer has yet become a billionaire.
I certainly haven't. However, when I started using this outside of the military for personal reasons, it took about a little over 7 months. We started like $30,000 in debt, plus a $60,000 home, which way out in the country is a really nice home. And within about 7 months, we had the home paid for, the car paid for, all of our debts off, and almost $20,000 in the bank. So it can be done.
So you were using remote viewing?
I was using what's called associative remote viewing.
Right.
Remote viewing and all psychic work is very bad at getting numbers and letters, alphanumerics. But if I say, okay, which team is going to win? And I describe, okay, they're wearing jerseys and so on. Well, I haven't told you anything. I've described one, but how are you going to?
Right.
And so if I say, okay, I'm not going to tell you what the target is, but if Team A wins, I want you to view this thing. If Team B wins, I want you to view the light. Okay,
but you don't totally tell that in advance.
No, you don't.
Yeah,
and
you set up a project that way.
That's right. And you tell the viewer, okay, this is project 70 what, 7 so, and the viewer sits and describes this thing that is hard, green, has circles, and all that.
Right.
Okay, and there it is.
There it is.
And the viewer has no idea what he's just done. He's just told you which team's going to win the game. Well, so then you go out and bet.
Sure. And my understanding is it works very well if you keep the bets small.
That's right.
If as soon as you start dealing with large sums of money, to my knowledge, it triggers so much emotion that the remote viewing capacity gets clouded.
If you care about the money. I'm a data freak. I did it just to collect data. And for me, winning $1 was the equivalent of winning $1,000 because I got the data. This I did, it worked, and so on.
Years ago, I interviewed a remote viewer, Keith Harari, who
Blue,
very successful, Blue Harari, who was doing silver future forecasting. Yeah. They did a great experiment, made over $100,000. And then he said, I began to feel like the goose that laid the golden egg.
Yeah.
And I think that's the downfall of people, or let me say, it places a limit on the ability of remote viewers to get into high finance.
Well, it does. But the thing is, you start focusing on the reward, and you start focusing on the conscious reward, on the money. The way to do ARV is to satisfy the subconscious mind. It's a child.
Yeah.
You give it what it wants. Okay? We have found that rather than winning the money and saying, I won money and all this, hey, give them a piece of chocolate. Every time they succeed, give them a piece of chocolate. That subconscious mind will want that piece of chocolate.
Well, what if someone else is making a lot of money on their ability? Isn't that create an ethical issue?
Yes, it does. And when you learn controlled remote viewing, especially because it is so powerful, ethics is a major part of it. The ability to be unethical is just right there. Always a temptation.
Yeah.
And, the classes I teach are at least a third ethics,
I would think, if nothing else, ethics is important because, at least for most people, you're going to have a clear mind if you know you're behaving ethically.
That's right.
Unless you're psychopathic or sociopathic, and you can be unethical and still have a clear mind.
That's right. Well, the thing is, if you're going on this theory, if you're a part of the collective consciousness, notice we don't say collective unconscious because the collective is very conscious. If you're a part of the collective conscious and you hurt someone or something in the collective consciousness, you've just hurt yourself. What will happen is your subconscious will say, I don't like hurting myself, and it quits. Simple as that.
Well, would you predict that eventually remote viewers, perhaps some of your students, will be able to use the ARV protocol that we've been discussing to accumulate a substantial fortune?
Yes. One of my students is a Mescalero Apache Indian medicine man. And he's the only one who's taken my advice. I tell people, don't bet money, because you don't want to make it about money. Learn to predict the first number on the pick 3 ball. It's a single number. When you get to where you can do that 80% of the time, then you will have learned something. Now, try the first and second ball. And by this time, you're a year and a half into your learning. And then, by the end of the third year, you're getting all 3 of the balls on a regular basis. And then you go to the pick 4. 5 or 6 years later, you go in and collect your $20 million. Or you can do it any other way, and 6 or 7 years from now, you'll still be buying tickets, and you won't win anything. You're still at chance. And he has done it, and he's been working on it about a year and a half, and he's now almost consistently getting the first 2 numbers on the first 2 balls. And so he's starting to chomp at the bit to get the 3 balls. And I said, okay, when you get the 3 balls on a consistent basis, start buying tickets.
So you can see that happening over time. Now, as I recall, when I interviewed you last, you said when you entered the program at Fort Meade, they explained the training method to you and told you it'll take you about 2 years to get proficient. But then you found that after 6 months,
Yeah.
And some of your students or other people in the program could become proficient after 3 months.
I took to this like a duck to water. I mean, this was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. I just piled in, face first and just dove in face first. And for me, this was both the most fascinating thing I've ever done and provided data for me. And I was in charge of this humongous database and I was in hog heaven. I mean, you couldn't have thrown me into anything that I loved more.
Well, since you were in charge of the database, then you would know the average time that it took people to become proficient.
That's right, yeah.
And that would be?
At that time, it was about 2 years. Now, like I say, I dove into it, and I became operational with slightly less than a year. And when I became the teacher, I was looking at analyzing the database all the way through. And so I was finding out what worked for the other viewers, what didn't. Up until then, they were just collecting records.
Because everyone is individual in terms of their strengths and weaknesses as a remote viewer.
That's right. And so I started seeing if I could apply some of that to the training. And pretty soon, within 4 months of 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, we were getting people operational.
Well, I know people watch these videos such as this interview, and I get occasional feedback from viewers and say, hey, how come I can't do remote viewing? I just watched your interview. What's the matter? I thought you were going to teach me to do remote viewing. So an interview is very different than a training program.
That's right, And, this is the same thing. I will teach, every time I teach a class, the basic class in CRV, I teach one afternoon in ARV, and then we usually go up to the Indian Casino. And Indian casinos are very famous for getting revenge on the white guys, because you don't win. And so far we've had one person break even, and everybody else has won money. And it works. However, then instead of slowly building up their talents, they go out and buy a ticket for the pick six, and they lose, and they get despondent, and so they quit trying.
So the emotional roller coaster of winning and losing is, I would think that's just emotional mental noise. That
it is, and this is why I took to it so well, is because when I won, I got data about what works. When I lost, I got data about what doesn't work. And so for me, I was always a winner.
Now, one other question I'd like to ask. I know in some of the situations that you were tasked to do in the military, everything is according to protocol. And,
That's right.
And you're given a target, which is you're blind to. It's just like a number, identify number 615897. In other situations, though, the target's right in front of you. I think you described a situation looking for drug traffickers when you're with the DEA out on an airplane over the ocean and looking down at the boats and trying to say which of the boat has a load of drugs.
Paul, Angela, and I, and I forget who else was with us. We got onto the anti-submarine warfare planes and went out over the Caribbean. And they would fly over ships that were out there. And we would sit there and determine what was on the ships. And if we found drugs, we would then do details to find out where the drugs were hidden on the ships. We were directly responsible because on that time they did act on our information alone. We were directly responsible for $82 million in drug seizures over 1 week's time. And the drug enforcement agency guy said, hey, that was great, but it was a drop in the ocean. He said, it didn't even scratch the surface of the drug traffic that's going on out there. However, they wanted to take our unit, move it to California and to Florida so that we could do that
full time.
Yeah. And the government said, no, we've got military.
Because you had many other military clients and intelligence clients at that point. Well, Lyn Buchanan, what a delightful conversation.
Oh, well, thank you. I've enjoyed
I'm really learning many, many fine points about the remote viewing process I wasn't aware of before, and I think our viewers will benefit as well.
Oh, good. I hope so, yeah.
Thank you for being with me.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you for being with us.